In recent years, there's been more media attention and public action over the environmental effects of single-use plastics. The constant consumption of these plastics has become a global epidemic, with heaving piles of trash littering our landscapes, oceans, and ecosystems. And it's been well studied that many of these items, from plastic water bottles to makeup wipes, are rarely recycled, with only about 10% being reused. The rest sits in landfills, where it can take up to 400 years or longer to decompose. Despite this dull outlook, there's been a shift amongst consumers. More Americans are opting for reusable water bottles and food tins, metal straws, and canvas bags instead of plastic for grocery shopping. But is it enough? There's one big pollution source that's rarely discussed, making up more than 1/3 of all collected litter on the planet. Can you guess it? It's cigarettes. Globally, about 4.5 trillion cigarettes are littered each year, says the public health nonprofit Truth Initiative. It seems like almost every day you see a person throwing a cigarette butt out a car window or onto a sidewalk.
We know from surveys of smokers that 2/3 of them say they dumped their cigarette butts sometime during the last month. And from observational studies of smokers following them around, for instance, people have found that smokers, even with cigarette butt receptacles nearby, tend to put them out on the ground and step on them.
That's Dr. Thomas Novotny, Professor Emeritus of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at San Diego State University. Part of his work is piecing together the negative effects of cigarette use.
It's important to realize that cigarette butts are plastic and non-biodegradable or poorly biodegradable at best. That alone causes us concern, or should cause us concern, as we increase our concern for single-use plastics and ban plastic bags and ban plastic straws. Cigarette butts are sort of the last kind of acceptable form of litter. It's part of the ritual of smoking.
Novotny has spent much of his career studying the public health and environmental impacts of tobacco use, and now e-cigarette use as well.
It's everything from trying to figure out what are the mortality and morbidity effects of smoking, but also now working on tobacco's impact on the environment. From the time that tobacco is grown, which is pretty hard on soils and it's characterized by a lot of pesticide use and child labor and other kinds of bad kind of things, to secondhand and thirdhand smoke, which are environmental contaminants from smoking, and then on to now concern for post-consumption waste, or cigarette butts, basically. And now that we have electronic cigarettes and devices, that also comes into consideration as electronic waste, everything from the batteries to the chemicals that leached out from those waste products as well.
Novotny says despite a decrease in the number of people smoking cigarettes, they still seem to be everywhere, from public beaches to parks across the U.S.
The fact that these are the most common picked up item around the world every year on beach cleanups, that is about 1/3 of all the items by count, not by weight, but by count, are cigarette butts. And that's enough to say, look, this is a public nuisance.
Cigarette butts are a public nuisance and eyesore, but more notably, they're toxic, leaking out chemicals like arsenic and lead.
It's not too hard to imagine this, given the chemicals that are in cigarettes, 50 or so carcinogens and 7,000 other chemicals. Nicotine is in itself a pesticide, and that alone makes it of concern that so many cigarette butts dumped into the environment every year may be causing some sort of chemical contamination, pollution of our waters or beaches or other natural areas.
And once they seep into those areas, they stay there for several years. A 2015 study published in the Public Library of Science found that after 2 years, a cigarette butt had only decomposed by about 38%. Many of us look at a cigarette and assume it's mainly made out of paper and is decomposable, but the filter in the cigarette is actually made entirely from plastic.
These things are non-biodegradable hazardous waste, and that they need to be regulated in ways that we haven't done yet. What we do know is that the filter has not done anything to improve health. It isn't there to protect the smoker. It's there to market the cigarette. And what that means is it makes it easier to smoke, and it may discourage some smokers from quitting because they think they're actually doing something, but they're really not. And it makes it, again, part of the smoking ritual. 99% of cigarettes are filtered. And one has to wonder what would happen if we took away the filter. Well, we don't know for sure, But we're doing some research now to compare what would happen to smokers who switch completely over to unfiltered cigarettes. I think the important thing is that I think many fewer cigarettes will be smoked, and that alone will help relieve the butt waste burden.
Novotny says that the tobacco industry first created these plastic filters in cigarettes as a marketing ploy.
When you think about it, a filter means that you've taken out all of the hazardous stuff. It's certainly not the case that the filter does that. It'll filter out some particulates, but many of the chemicals that go through the cigarette into the smoker's body, cancers, heart disease, all the other diseases have not really abated as a result of filter use. They've gone down because people have quit smoking.
Still, each year, trillions of cigarettes are dumped onto roadways, sidewalks, and parks that then wash away into storm drains when it rains. These underground waterways lead into different river systems, ultimately feeding into our oceans. The National Audubon Society is a national bird conservation group, and earlier this year shared a photo taken by one of their volunteers of a bird feeding its chick a dirty cigarette butt on a Florida beach. This accidental consumption is not a rare occurrence. Birds, marine life, animals, dogs, and even children all fall victim to the chemicals found in cigarettes.
What has been found is that bottom-feeding fish and other birds, etc., have been found to have cigarette butts in their gullets, mistaken for food. We know that pets have consumed them. There's actually a pet poison center in a couple of places in the U.S. We've been able to collect data from those to show that birds, dogs, other kinds of non-discriminate eaters have consumed them. Even children have done so, and it's not uncommon to have kids on the beach find cigarette butts in the sand. And in fact, there's been some cases of kids consuming them, in many cases actually, and having nicotine toxicity and having to go into emergency rooms to be treated for this.
Novotny and other researchers wanted to measure the extent of the damage caused by one cigarette butt, so recreated the controls in a laboratory setting.
So we've, in the laboratory, been able to identify on the sort of level of toxicity for cigarette butts in the aquatic environment by doing some tests using fish and mussels, and some other organisms have been studied as well to show that the chemicals leached out of cigarette butts can be lethal. And the figure that we've come up with is 1 cigarette butt in a liter of water, either salt or freshwater fish, who are exposed to that concentration die. Half of them die. It's called the lethal dose 50.
If one cigarette is this toxic, think about the 6 trillion cigarettes that are smoked each year worldwide. And in polls, more than 2/3 of smokers admit to improperly disposing of their cigarette butts. So what's being done to curb this habitual littering? Novotny says there are laws in place, but rarely are they enforced.
In California, the fine for littering is $1,000 for every episode. And that includes cigarette butts. If someone observes them, if a policeman observes someone littering their cigarette butt, it can generate a fine of up to $1,000 in a day of community service. Very few of those are levied, and very few enforcement efforts are made, for instance, on smoke-free beaches. There's always other priorities that sort of get in the way of that, and that's not something that's very easy to change.
Novotny says that many public health researchers, including himself, are trying to find ways to make smoking less palatable to consumers. One example is working to pass legislation that bans flavors like menthol that mask tobacco and make it easier and more appealing to smoke. And you don't have to be a scientist to take part. Everyone can make a difference in some way.
I think that as time goes on, people become their own sort of best sort of enforcers. Hopefully smokers respond to that as a sort of public good, but non-smokers can remind smokers that it is illegal or really improper to be dumping their cigarette butts in national parks and beaches, and state parks and beaches, and city parks and beaches.
To find out more on this topic and our guest, Dr. Thomas Novotny, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment is written and produced by Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
It's National Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, as well as National Family Caregivers Month. The two go together since there are more than 16 million families and friends in the U.S. caring for someone with Alzheimer's. According to the Alzheimer's Association, 4 out of 5 caregivers say they'd like more support in providing care, especially from their families, yet 39% haven't engaged others in caregiving tasks. Ruth Drew, Director of Information and Support Services for the Alzheimer's Association, has suggestions on ways to help.
Make a standing appointment to give the caregiver a break so they can run errands or go to a support group. Caregivers often feel isolated or alone, so check in with a phone call or stop by for a visit. And when you offer support, be specific. Say, I'm going to the store, what do you need, rather than call me if you need anything.
People overwhelmingly agree caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's should be a group effort. Find more tips and resources for caregivers at alz.org.
Your holiday grocery basket is waiting to be filled, and Aldi is a simpler, faster, and more cost-effective place to shop for groceries this holiday season. According to a new study by Kantar, more than 3/4 of household primary grocery shoppers agree Aldi is simpler to shop compared to other grocery stores. A time test with more than 700 shoppers confirms it. Aldi is at least 20% faster to shop. What's more, 9 out of 10 respondents who shopped at Aldi agree Aldi is more cost-effective than other grocery stores. It's all because every inch of an Aldi store is intentionally designed to provide a more streamlined experience, offering shoppers exactly what they need. And especially during the holidays, that's where fun comes in. Every week, Aldi puts out nearly 100 unique Aldi finds, ranging from luxury jarred candles and cast iron cookware to a range of advent calendars and holiday pet sweaters. During the holidays, shoppers are pressed for time and money, and Aldi has pioneered a model that gives people more of both.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints Radio, a production of Media Tracks Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Viewpoints stories on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and viewpointsonline.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Coming up next week.
You might say, oh, I didn't do anything different. I just did more of the same, going out to eat, taking Ubers. And so my life doesn't look any better, but I'm spending a lot more money.
How technology is making it harder to keep track of our money. Then,
a lot of Americans my age, our first encounter with colors and names came from the Crayola crayon box.
The deeper meanings behind color. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.